Can you brew matcha? In this video, we're going to find out. We're going to make matcha in a tea strainer and see how the flavor compares to a bowl of matcha made with a whisk. When we were visiting tea farmers in Shizuoka, we did a matcha tasting at a farm owned by a few younger tea farmers. At Neo Teas, we're constantly on the lookout for more matcha, so these tastings are a great way to find new, pesticide-free matcha for our website. What was different about this tea tasting was that the matcha was prepared in a strainer, just like you would brew a leaf tea. Normally, the matcha would be whisked into water using a bamboo whisk, which creates a nice light green foam on top. This foam creates a light and airy texture in the matcha and even a smoother flavor. So why would these farmers prepare the tea without it? This method is actually a good way to taste test a matcha. The foam creates additional variables, which can make it harder to assess the flavor of a matcha. For example, a decent matcha with a dense foam may taste just as good as a top-tier matcha with not enough foam. The strainer levels the playing field, so you're experiencing the taste and texture of the matcha itself, not the foam. But can you even brew matcha? Unlike normal leaf teas, which are infused into water, matcha is mixed directly into water. This makes matcha a suspension, meaning it's made by suspending matcha particles into water. But that's not the full story. In addition to being mixed into water, these matcha particles actually brew. The water-soluble components of the tea leaf are extracted from the water and they form a solution. Because the matcha is ground into such a fine powder, it has a higher surface area, so it can actually brew really efficiently. This was demonstrated in one of our tea experiments where we tested a more coarsely ground version of matcha powder. The flavor was decent, but because the particles were larger, there was less relative surface area, and therefore the extraction wasn't as rich. The fine matcha powder had a much richer flavor thanks to the higher surface area. So let's try this out. First, we're going to prepare a normal bowl of matcha. We'll add in 2 grams or 1 teaspoon of matcha. For this experiment, I'll be using the Masuda-en Kyoto matcha, currently one of my favorites. Then I'll pour in just a tablespoon of water to smooth it out into a paste. This makes it easier to smooth out the clumps and make sure they don't end up in the final tea. Next, we'll add in 1/3 cup of water at 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 degrees Celsius. After all the matcha has been combined into the water, it's time to start whisking. To create a good foam on top, you want to use a bamboo whisk and whisk the matcha in rapid zigzag motions using your wrist. After just a few seconds, a light green foam should appear on the matcha. So we can set this aside for now and try using the strainer technique. For this, we're going to use the same amount of powder and water. We'll place the strainer in the bowl and then put in 1 teaspoon of matcha powder inside. I'm using a fine sifter for this one because I don't want to let any matcha clumps through. Now it's time to add in the water and let the matcha brew. One big advantage of this method is that you don't need to worry about the clumps. The strainer will take care of them. Another advantage is that it's easier to control the experiment. If I were testing 2 or 3 matchas side by side, I could just brew them with the same strainer, same water, and same amount of powder, and then the only variable would be the matcha itself. I wouldn't have to worry about how long I spent whisking or the whisking technique. After allowing this to brew for 1 minute, it's time to take out the strainer. You can see some matcha is still stuck to the bottom, but this isn't that big of a deal. You can always give the strainer a few more dips to get the rest of it out. Now let's compare the two. First, we have the foamy bowl of matcha. Because of the foam, the matcha has a much smoother and creamier flavor, almost like a latte. It's amazing how much of an influence texture has on how flavor is perceived. It really makes the matcha taste lighter and milder. Then we have the matcha made with the strainer. Because there's no foam, the tea feels denser and heavier. The flavor is much more powerful and you really get more of the steamed vegetable notes. When you're testing out a matcha, you really want to put it under stress and look for all the deficiencies within the tea. Some tea tasters even use boiling water to bring out the bitterness, or prepare it with less water to make the taste more concentrated. The best way to test a tea is not necessarily the best way to enjoy a tea. If you wanted to enjoy this tea at home, I would recommend preparing it like a normal usucha matcha. The flavor and texture are much more enjoyable with added foam. That being said, the strainer method is a good way to stress test the tea. You can prepare it in a more controlled environment and get a better sense of the weaknesses of the matcha. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to try some of the best matcha we found during our travels around Japan, you can find them on our website, neoteas.com. If you have any questions about tea, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until then, we'll see you next time.